My name is Margaret Carter, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm sitting here in my kitchen in Cedar Falls, Iowa, 3 weeks after burying my only child. And I need to tell you this story, because what happened at Danny's funeral, what that priest said to me, it shattered everything I believed about forgiveness, about faith, about the man who baptized my son 19 years ago. The morning of September 15th started like the worst day of any mother's life should. Gray, cold, and suffocating. The funeral home smelled like lilies and old wood polish, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. I sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Catholic Church, the same church where I'd prayed every Sunday for 32 years, where Danny had his first communion, where my husband Robert and I were married. Sarah Mitchell, my best friend since high school, held my hand so tightly I thought she might break my fingers. But I needed that pain. It was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality while Father Sullivan spoke about my boy, like he actually knew him. Daniel Carter was a young man of great promise. Father Sullivan's voice echoed through the church, his Irish accent still thick after all these years in Iowa. He touched many lives in his 19 years with us. I wanted to scream. Danny wasn't just a young man of promise. He was my everything. After Robert died in that grain elevator accident 2 years ago, Danny became my reason to keep breathing. He was studying engineering at Iowa State, came home every weekend to check on me, to fix whatever was broken around the house, to make sure I was eating enough. The drunk driver who hit him head-on last month didn't care about Danny's promise, didn't care that he was 3 blocks from home, coming back from his part-time job at Murphy's Hardware. Didn't care that he was all I had left. After the service, as people filed past me with their hollow condolences and casserole promises, I found myself alone with Father Sullivan in the vestry. This was where I used to bring Danny when he was little and misbehaved during Mass, where Father Sullivan would talk to him about being a good Catholic boy. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his pale blue eyes avoiding mine. "I know this is difficult, but we must remember that God has a plan for all of us." I'd heard this before. Same words, same tone, same meaningless comfort. But something in his voice, something in the way he wouldn't look at me directly, made my grief sharpen into something else. "Father," I said, my voice hoarse from crying, "I need to ask you something. About forgiveness." He stiffened slightly, his hands clasping behind his back. "Of course, my child. The man who killed Danny. When he's sentenced next month. The family victim impact statement. Should I forgive him? Should I tell the judge that, as a Catholic, I forgive him for destroying my life?" Father Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the crucifix on the wall. When he finally spoke, his words cut through me like a blade. "Margaret, we must be practical about forgiveness. We cannot forgive everyone. Some sins, some actions, they require justice first. The Church understands this." I stared at him, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "We cannot forgive everyone. There are circumstances," he continued, his voice growing firmer, "where forgiveness must be earned, where the harm is too great, where the person shows no remorse. Not everyone deserves our mercy." The room felt like it was spinning. This was the man who had preached to me about Christ's infinite mercy, who had told me when Robert died that God's love was boundless, who had baptized Danny with promises of salvation and grace. "But Father," I whispered, "isn't that what Christ taught? To forgive those who trespass against us?" His jaw tightened. "The Church's teachings are complex, Mrs. Carter. Not everything is as simple as the words in Matthew." I left that church that day feeling more alone than I had since Robert died. More alone than I'd felt even in those first horrible days after Danny's accident. Because I'd lost more than my son that day. I'd lost my faith in the man who was supposed to guide it. But as I drove home through the cornfields that stretched endlessly around Cedar Falls, something else began to grow alongside my grief. A nagging feeling that Father Sullivan's words weren't just cold theology. They felt personal. They felt like a man speaking from experience. That night I called Sarah. "Did you hear what he said to me?" I asked her, pacing in my empty living room, past Danny's graduation photo, past the couch where he used to stretch out and complain about his engineering homework. "About forgiveness." Sarah's voice was careful, measured. "Maggie, honey, you're grieving. Maybe you misunderstood." "No." I cut her off. "Sarah, you've known me for 30 years. Have you ever known me to misunderstand something like that?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah? Maggie," she said finally. "There are things about Father Sullivan. Things that happened a long time ago that maybe you should know about." My hands started shaking. "What things?" "Can you come over tomorrow? There's someone I think you need to talk to. Someone who knew Father Sullivan before he came to Cedar Falls." I hung up the phone and stood in my dark living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my old life, the life where I trusted my priest, where I believed in the goodness of people, where I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my husband. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Outside, the Iowa wind howled through the corn stubble, and somewhere in town, Father Sullivan was probably preparing for evening prayers, but I was done praying to a God whose servant could look a grieving mother in the eye and tell her that some people don't deserve forgiveness. By morning, I would begin to understand why. Sarah's house sits on Maple Street, just 4 blocks from mine, in one of those neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone else's business but pretends they don't. I'd walk these sidewalks 1,000 times, with Danny when he was learning to ride his bike, with Robert when we'd take evening strolls before his back got too bad from the grain elevator work, alone these past 2 years when the silence in my own house became too much to bear. But walking up Sarah's front steps that Tuesday morning felt different, like I was crossing some invisible line between the woman I'd been and whoever I was about to become. Sarah opened the door before I could knock, her nurse's intuition probably reading the exhaustion on my face. "Coffee's ready," she said, wrapping me in one of those hugs that promised I wasn't going to get through this alone. "Is she here?" I asked, referring to the mysterious someone Sarah had mentioned on the phone. "In the kitchen. Maggie, before we go in, I need you to know that what you're about to hear, it's going to change how you see a lot of things." The woman sitting at Sarah's kitchen table was probably in her mid-50s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much. She stood when I entered, extending a weathered hand. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Detective Linda Hayes, retired. I worked for the Cedar Rapids Police Department for 28 years. Sarah and I went to nursing school together before I decided law enforcement was my calling." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the way she looked directly at me when she spoke. "Detective Hayes, Sarah said you knew something about Father Sullivan. I investigated him. In 1993, the coffee cup in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down carefully, afraid I might drop it. "Investigated him for what?" Detective Hayes exchanged a look with Sarah before continuing. "Sexual assault of a minor. The victim was 12 years old. Name was Tommy Brennan." The kitchen went very quiet. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Patterson next door calling for her cat, the normal sounds of a normal morning in a normal world, where priests didn't assault children and mothers didn't bury their sons. "What happened?" I managed to ask. "Tommy Brennan was an altar boy at St. Anna Patrick's in Cedar Rapids, where Father Sullivan served before coming here to Cedar Falls. Smart kid, family didn't have much money, but he was devoted to the church. His mother worked double shifts at the meat-packing plant. His father had left when Tommy was 8. Detective Hayes pulled out a manila folder, the kind that had seen too many years and too many cases. Father Sullivan began mentoring Tommy. Extra time after Mass, help with homework, special privileges. Classic grooming behavior. Sarah, I said, turning to my friend. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Because when Father Sullivan came to Cedar Falls in '94, the case had been handled. The church transferred him. Tommy's family was given money to keep quiet. And the official story was that Father Sullivan requested a transfer to serve a smaller community. Handled? I could hear my voice getting sharper. A child was assaulted and it was handled. Detective Hayes leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, in 1993, I was a young detective. Idealistic, believed the system worked. I had a solid case against Father Sullivan. Physical evidence, witness testimony, Tommy's own statement. I was preparing to file charges when I got called into my supervisor's office. She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs and documents. The church had hired expensive lawyers. The district attorney was getting pressure from the bishop. Tommy's mother was suddenly afraid to testify. And Father Sullivan, he never admitted to anything, but he didn't fight the transfer either. I stared at the photos. A young boy with dark hair and serious eyes. School pictures that showed the progression from a smiling 8-year-old to a hollow-eyed 12-year-old. Where is Tommy now? That's why I'm here, Detective Hayes said. Sarah called me after your conversation last night. Tommy Brennan lives here in Cedar Falls. Has for the past 15 years. He's a mechanic at Johnson's Auto Shop on Main Street. The room started spinning. He's been here. All this time? In the same town as Father Sullivan? Tommy changed his last name when he turned 18. Goes by Tommy Morrison now. Most people don't know his connection to the priest. But Sarah figured it out about 5 years ago, when she treated him in the ER after a car accident. Sarah nodded. His medical records, his emergency contact information, some things clicked. I never said anything to anyone. But when you called last night, talking about what Father Sullivan said about forgiveness, he said not everyone deserves forgiveness. I said quietly. He said some sins require justice first. Detective Hayes' face darkened. He was talking about himself. The man knows exactly what he did to Tommy Brennan, and he knows that boy never got justice. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against Sarah's linoleum floor. I need to see him. Tommy, I mean. I need to talk to him. Maggie, Sarah said gently. Are you sure? What are you hoping to accomplish? I thought about Danny, about the drunk driver who would be sentenced next month, about Father Sullivan's cold eyes when he told me some people don't deserve mercy. I don't know yet, but a man who hurt a child stood at my son's funeral and lectured me about the limits of forgiveness. That can't stand. Detective Hayes closed her folder. Mrs. Carter, I need to warn you. What happened to Tommy? It destroyed his faith, his ability to trust people. He struggled with relationships, with depression, with anger. He's functional. He works. He pays his bills. But he's never been the same. None of us are ever the same after someone hurts us, I said, thinking of Robert's funeral, of Danny's empty bedroom, of all the ways we learn to carry our wounds. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for what's right. As I left Sarah's house that morning, I realized something had shifted inside me. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But alongside it was something I hadn't felt since the night Danny died. Purpose. Father Sullivan had spent 30 years in Cedar Falls, preaching about mercy and redemption, while his victim lived just blocks away from the church. He had looked me in the eye at my son's funeral and told me some people don't deserve forgiveness, probably thinking about the boy he had hurt and gotten away with hurting. But he was wrong about one thing. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. Sometimes it just means justice is waiting for the right person to come along and demand it. By afternoon, I would be standing in Johnson's Auto Shop, looking into the eyes of a man whose childhood had been stolen by the priest I'd trusted with my family's spiritual welfare for over 30 years. And by evening, I would understand exactly what I was going to do about it. Johnson's auto shop sits on the corner of Main and 3rd, in a building that's been fixing cars since before I was born. The smell of motor oil and metal always reminded me of Robert, who could fix anything with an engine but never had the patience to explain how he did it. Walking through those doors that afternoon felt like walking into a memory. Help you with something. The voice came from under the hood of a blue pickup truck. All I could see were work boots and oil-stained coveralls. I'm looking for Tommy Morrison. The work stopped. The man emerged slowly from under the hood, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, and the kind of build that came from 30 years of honest work. But it was his eyes that hit me. The same serious, guarded expression I'd seen in those childhood photos Detective Hayes had shown me. "That's me," he said carefully. "Do I know you? My name is Margaret Carter. I think we need to talk about Father Sullivan." The shop rag fell from his hands. For a moment, neither of us moved. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the garage door seemed to highlight every line on his face, every year that had passed since he was 12 years old. "I don't talk about that," he said finally. "My son Danny died 3 weeks ago." Father Sullivan performed his funeral service. Tommy's expression softened slightly. "I heard about that. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Carter." Danny seemed like a good kid. "You knew him?" "He brought his truck in for oil changes. Always polite. Always asked about my family, even though I don't have one." Tommy turned back toward the pickup, but he wasn't really working anymore. "What does this have to do with Sullivan?" I took a deep breath. "At the funeral, I asked Father Sullivan about forgiveness, whether I should forgive the drunk driver who killed my boy. And he told me that we cannot forgive everyone, that some people don't deserve mercy." Tommy's hand stilled on the engine. "He said that?" "To a grieving mother at her son's funeral. A man who's preached about Christ's infinite mercy for 30 years told me that some sins require justice first." Tommy straightened up, his face hard. "And you think he was talking about me?" "I think he was talking about himself." The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sounds of Cedar Falls going about its afternoon business. Kids getting out of school, people heading home from work. The normal rhythm of a small Iowa town where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are supposed to stay buried. "Mrs. Carter," Tommy said finally, "what exactly do you want from me?" "I want you to tell me what happened. You already know what happened. Detective Hayes kept good records. I want to hear it from you." Tommy walked to the garage door and hit the button to close it. The mechanical grinding filled the space as the door came down, shutting out the world. When it was quiet again, he turned to face me. "I was 12, he said simply. "My mom worked all the time, and I was alone a lot. Father Sullivan started paying attention to me. Made me feel special, like I mattered. He said I had potential, that God had plans for me." He sat down on a tool chest, suddenly looking much older than his 35 years. "It started with staying after Mass to help clean up, then homework help in his office, then weekend trips to youth retreats that were just him and me. He told me it was our special relationship, that God wanted us to be close." My hands were clenched so tightly my nails were cutting into my palms. "Tommy, he told me that what we did together was how older men showed love to younger men in biblical times. That David and Jonathan had the same kind of relationship. He made it sound holy." The words hung in the air like a poison. I thought about all the times I'd sent Danny to serve as an altar boy, all the youth group activities, all the trust I'd placed in a man who had used God's name to hurt a child. "How long did it go on?" 8 months. Until I finally told my mom. She went to the police and Detective Hayes was assigned to the case. She believed me. She fought for me. But then... The church made it go away. Tommy nodded. My mom got scared. The lawyers, the pressure, the money they offered. She was working 2 jobs just to keep us fed. And suddenly there were men in expensive suits telling her that her son's reputation would be destroyed if this went to trial. That Father Sullivan was a man of God who deserved the benefit of the doubt. What about you? What did you want? I wanted him to pay for what he did. I wanted him to admit it, to say he was sorry, to face consequences like anyone else would. Tommy's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing the careful control. Instead, he got transferred to a nice little town where he could start fresh, and I got to live with what he did to me for the rest of my life. I stood up, pacing the small space between workbenches and tool cabinets. Tommy, what if I told you there might be a way to get justice now? It's been 30 years, Mrs. Carter. The statute of limitations. Not legal justice. Public justice. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about a man who hurt a child, who got away with it, who then had the audacity to tell a grieving mother that some people don't deserve forgiveness. I'm thinking about 30 years of him standing at that pulpit, preaching about morality and redemption while his victim lived just blocks away. And I'm thinking it's time the people of Cedar Falls knew exactly who they've been taking communion from all these years. Tommy shook his head. Mrs. Carter, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've built a life here. I have a business. I have friends who don't know about my past. I can't... Tommy, I interrupted. You don't have to do anything. This is my fight now. But I want you to know that what happened to you matters. That 12-year-old boy deserved justice, and even if it's 30 years late, he's going to get it. I walked toward the door, then turned back. There's going to be a town council meeting next Thursday. They're discussing the church's request for tax breaks to fund their new youth center. I think the people of Cedar Falls should know exactly what kind of man is going to be running programs for their children. Tommy stared at me. You're really going to do this? My son is dead, Tommy. I can't bring him back. I can't get justice for him because what happened was an accident. But you're alive, and what happened to you wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Father Sullivan made a choice to hurt you, and then he made a choice to hide from the consequences. I opened the door, letting the late afternoon light flood back into the garage. He told me some people don't deserve forgiveness. He was right. But he wasn't talking about the drunk driver who killed my son. He was talking about himself. As I walked home through the streets of Cedar Falls, past the church where I'd worshipped for 30 years, past the house where I'd raised my son, past all the familiar landmarks of my old life, I felt something I hadn't felt since Danny died. Peace. Not the peace of acceptance or healing. That would take years, if it ever came at all. But the peace of purpose, the peace of knowing that sometimes, when everything else is taken from you, you still have the power to stand up for what's right. Thursday night, I would walk into that town council meeting with Detective Hayes' file folder and 30 years of silence that was finally going to be broken. Father Sullivan would learn that mercy and justice aren't opposites. They're partners. And sometimes justice comes not from courts or lawyers, but from a grieving mother who refuses to let evil hide behind the collar of a priest. Some people don't deserve forgiveness, Father Sullivan had told me. He was about to find out exactly what that meant.